Good evening. Welcome to Conspiracy Cafe. I'm your host, George Freund. We have a new little song, or an old song, to start the show with because there's been a lot of developments on the global theater. And that's a very, very pertinent song, really. It tells you about the emergency that's coming and the tactics and techniques that may lead to your survival. And survival you may be facing in a very short period of time. Conspiracy Cafe is the point of the sword. That channel is its location here in Toronto. We don't give up. We don't run away. We do what has to be done. We face the music. Sometimes the show morphs into another show a few times before we're ready to come in for production. And the last couple of days is no exception. If you follow Alex Jones and you've been listening to some of the main headlines on his show, you know they've put out the contract to staff the FEMA camps. So Kellogg, Brown and Root, of course, gets a no-bid contract to look after these multi-million-dollar facilities scattered across the United States. And they're prepared to open them on 72 hours notice. That is like a lightning rod. The other lightning rod, of course, is the fact that the National Defense Authorization Act was voted on by the Senate and passed. And 61 of the yokels that you call senators think that the Constitution is to be shredded and carved up. And they're going to give the military the authority to act on the battlefield. The battlefield is described as the United States of America, with the ability to arrest without warrant and hold without trial American citizens in perpetuity, that is, forever. Those should be casus belli. That's the Fort Sumter shot of a civil war. The trouble is, people are so uninformed and so stupid and so dumbed down, they won't even figure it out until after they're behind the barbed wire. And then maybe something will click in. That's just how devious and dark the world has become in the last week. Even more so is the fact the war drums are beating and they're getting prepared for the big one, WW3. And we'll get into that to some degree. Yesterday, December 7th, was Pearl Harbor Day, the day of infamy. It was also another day of infamy, a more important day of infamy because it's not 70 years ago, it's yesterday. And your tomorrows will never be the same again because we've made a new deal. Not a Roosevelt deal for the economy. We made a new deal with the United States of America to merge ourselves together. Our Prime Minister went to Washington to sign the final agreement for this security perimeter arrangement. And that's why you might have to hide under the stairs. And that's why I liked that song and thought it was pertinent compared to our normal song. So I paraphrased Roosevelt's words on December the 7th. Today, December the 7th, 2011, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America and the Dominion of Canada were suddenly and deliberately attacked by the New World Order forces under the control of Satan himself. The globalists have, therefore, undertaken a surprise offensive extending throughout the Americas. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. The people of the United States and the Dominion of Canada have already formed their opinions and well understand the implications to the very life and safety of our nations. I believe that I interpret the will of the people of both our nations when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the uttermost, but we will make it very certain that this form of treachery shall never again endanger us. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our combined forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph. So help us God. Because with the Strategic Border Initiative, our Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, surrendered the sovereignty of the Dominion of Canada to the United States of America. It allows American law enforcement to come armed into Canada and effect due process of law, which will be a law that you had absolutely no input on, the NDAA, Section 1867, which is kind of ironic since that's the founding year of our Confederation, Canada, to come in and eliminate from the battlefield, because the battlefield also incurs the planet Earth, that the American military can execute without warrant or capture without warrant any person anywhere on the planet Earth. That's what our great Prime Minister has done. A speech like that should have been read in Parliament by one of our lackluster, lame duck, ballless politicians. No. The big crisis is the Defense Minister went for a helicopter ride. Who cares? It really doesn't affect me, and to be perfectly honest with you, he's the boss. And if he wants to test a helicopter, that's well within his purview. Giving away the country is a whole other factor. Can we zoom in on the screen there, Mr. Producer? And we have a picture of the treacherous attack on Pearl Harbor, which was all manufactured to start a war. A little bit of our two traitors-in-chief here, President No Birth Certificate Obama and Stephen I go to the Bilderberg meetings and work for the Nazi fascists to eliminate freedom on the planet Earth and destroy you 6 ways from Sunday, Harper. Then, of course, there's never any warnings to any of this stuff. This is the Japanese Hilo Tribune Herald. Who would ever notice, right? It was a surprise attack. These are the headlines on November the 29th. Japan may strike over the weekend. Duh! What part of it don't you understand? And even to go back further in history, this book, written in 1925 by Hector C. Bywater, a British intelligence officer in World War I, The Great Pacific War. The Great Pacific War details the whole war in the Pacific in 1925. It was read by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and debated in the Baltimore Sun, a very popular newspaper of its day, and almost required reading by people in the Congress and such. And this little gentleman here sitting off to the side in the naval uniform you'll see on the blog, conspiracy-cafe.org.net.com, whatever one you want to use, is Captain Isoroku Yamamoto, who later became Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the orchestrator of the attack on Pearl Harbor. He really loved the Great Pacific War. He bought a copy while he was naval attaché in Washington, took it to Japan, had it translated into Japanese, and that became the textbook for operations for the Imperial Japanese Navy for many years to come, ending primarily with those famous words, other than Japanese will attack on the weekend, Tora, Tora, Tora. We're coming to clean your clocks. But of course, nobody listens to stuff like that. And then we have an old magazine article, the Saturday Review, The Next War, 1st August 1925, The Great Pacific War by Hector C. Bywater, for the world to see, except the world doesn't see too much. And then we end with a little bit of optimism and hope to say that with knowledge we can change our destiny. We can be the St. George to slay the dragon if we so choose and so desire. We just have to choose and desire. We can sleep in on Sunday, December the 7th, and wake up to machine gun fire, explosions, be boiled alive in oil in Pearl Harbor, to drown horribly inside some shattered wreck of a battleship. Or we can stand up like good men and women and say, "Excuse me? No. This type of treachery will not be tolerated. This is treason at the highest levels by people at the highest levels, and nothing but a complete load of idiots claiming to be our leaders." So this border deal comes with all the PR words that probably come from the 1929 classic propaganda. We're going to harmonize everything. Everything will be harmonized. Our police have the same uniforms as the police in the South. Our army shoots the same guns as the army in the South. Harmonized. Very harmonized. Everything will be harmonized. I got the shock of my life even coming here tonight, and I'm going to have to do a reconnaissance later because I found a big, big change in downtown Toronto that I hadn't noticed before. So something has been set up. Maybe it's just a baby FEMA camp, but a significant change that wasn't there not too long ago. And I'm going to have to scout it out and report back to you for next week and take some pictures to post on the blog tonight. If I known we were going to be late tonight, I may have just stopped over to have a good eyeball at it and just say, my God in heaven, what are they doing? But there's 2.7 million people here in Toronto. This is a very, very, very common transit point downtown that thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people walk by. And no one has seen this. Or at least they see it and they don't understand the significance. I don't want to blow my hand now until I investigate it further, in case they change it, alter it, or delete it in some fashion. I want the photographic proof. Next year, 2012, is also the anniversary year, 200th anniversary year of the War of 1812, where Great Britain and the United States fought off, and unfortunately we were on the receiving end, being the colonies here. It was just another war for globalization. The British were pretty much busy fighting Napoleon, and the American government decided that they were just going to take over the Americas. There used to be a saying way back then called Manifest Destiny. The North Pole to Tierra del Fuego down on the very bottom of the Americas was all by divine right going to be the Americas. But a funny thing happened on the way to the war, and it's very ironic in a way. Can we just show a quick image there, just to give people an idea of what it used to be? Sir Isaac Brock, British general, leading the troops. I used to live in the Niagara region, so I'm very familiar as a young lad with all the battlefields and forts and all that sort of thing. Tecumseh getting the belt from General Brock, as opposed to a beating, the belt to wear. And just a great deal of history that's just lost to us because we don't learn from our history. One of the most important facets was when the Americans did invade, was a woman of dual nationality, Laura Secord. Everybody knows about the chocolates and the ice cream, and maybe they never really give consideration to the fact that Laura Secord's home was occupied by the American Army in 1813. Her husband was wounded in the Battle of Queenston Heights. She was tending to him. She overheard the plans the Americans had for the invasion and went through very heavy bush and forest, losing her shoes, treading barefoot to warn the British that the Americans were coming. And they successfully mounted a counterattack and stopped the invasion, and to a great extent that's why we're Canadian. Laura Secord was an American. She was born in the United States. She was born in Massachusetts. And in a way, we owe a lot to this American because it's the people of our countries that are the victims of the globalists, the politicians, the bankers, the elitists. So this really isn't ever a war between nations or states or ideologies. It's always a war of manipulation and control of the markets for these elitists. And we're just dumb enough to fight them. But this elimination of the border is nothing new. Well, I guess we could always just show Laura Secord for a second here on a Canadian stamp. We don't talk about our history, at least that history, not too much, because it's not politically correct, because we curry favor with the Americans, and we don't ever want to say that hostilities existed between us, although we were good to each other. We returned the bodies of our fallen American soldiers, or your fallen American soldiers, however you want to put it, and returned them home with honors when we discovered them in some of our diggings, and we'll get into what happened to American soldiers by Americans shortly. This is the border coming down, the Germans coming to the Austrian border with the Anschluss Agreement, and just lifting the rails and saying, okay, we're here, this is our country now, nothing you can do about it. Of course, something can be done about it much later. Of course, World War II will envelop, and you'll all be bombed and strafed and killed. Some of the other things that we have to be very concerned about is the federal government is starting something called the Office of Religious Freedom. And that should just send shivers through your spine. This is a woman being burned at the stake. The Office of Religious Freedom is posted on the website as well. And we can see that the Papal Nuncio is signing it or contributing to it. And I've said many, many times before, and it's basically just scripture really, the Vatican, the Roman Empire, is the Church of the Antichrist. That's in the Bible. The Roman Church is built on the rock, Peter. And Jesus said very clearly who and what Peter was when he describes, and the link is on that blog as well. Satan, get behind me. He called him very clearly what he was. So the church that's built on the rock of Satan is what? And that's why we have the Office of Religious Freedom. That's why the Bible was a banned book. That's why you weren't allowed to read it. That's why you were tortured and killed if you had one, and burned at the stake. But this is our Stephen Harpenter future here. American law enforcement, with all their nice guns coming across the border to do you anytime, anywhere. And there's nothing really you can do about it, because once they take you back across the border, the Canadian courts really can't do anything to compel the Americans to do anything once they've taken you to a FEMA camp somewhere. Very good pool. And like I said, we did good deeds with the fallen soldiers in the war, because basically they're all victims of tyranny, and return them to a proper grave in America, with both countries saluting and honoring basically those victims of atrocity, the power mongers. You have the video there, the hot email I sent there? That's one I'd like to play now. And basically what comes from this is just absolutely shocking. It's like I say, the show's ready, I'm ready to go, I'm just looking for images to have for the show. And then I come across this news article, people have said it for years, that there are far more casualties in these wars that America is not admitting to. And that there must be many, many bodies. And yes, there are. And they were found. They were found in a garbage dump in the United States of America. The United States of America turned 274 brave American service personnel into a stinking heap of garbage and left them there to rot. And we wonder how many more exist like this. Okay, roll it.
Levels here. U.S. military records show that the Air Force dumped the remains of at least 274 American soldiers in a Virginia landfill, and that number is far greater than the military had previously acknowledged before stopping this secretive practice 3 years ago. Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon with more on this. You just taken that image of the dump, and God, so many things go through your mind, Jennifer. What was the Air Force doing with the remains of our troops?
Well, Jenna, this is the type of story that should rock this building and should cause heads to roll at the Air Force. I remember when Secretary Gates found out 3 years ago that the Dover mortuary was taking the cremated remains of service members and cremating them in a pet cemetery mortuary. That, it appears, was just the tip of the iceberg. What has been revealed in a investigation by the Washington Post is that the Air Force, which runs Dover mortuary, was essentially taking the remains of 274 military personnel, as you mentioned, the parts of those who had been killed between 2004 and 2008. There were more than 1,700 fragments that were cremated and sent to this King George landfill in Virginia, essentially a trash dump. The revelations came about after a 4-year investigation by the widow of Sergeant Scott Smith. He was in a bomb disposal unit, had been killed in July 2006, and she kept asking questions of the Air Force where the remains of her husband had gone. Eventually she got the answer, and when she got the answer, she shared it with the Washington Post, and that's how we know about this story.
This is unbelievable. You mentioned that this is a type of story that should rock the building that you're in. Is it? Are we getting that type of reaction from the Pentagon?
Well, the Air Force has been slow to react. The Defense Secretary's spokesman, who I spoke to this morning, George Little, says that the Secretary is aware of the story, and he is supporting right now a practice that began in 2008, which is to bury the cremated remains at sea. But the Air Force says that there were so many pieces coming back from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that they could not DNA match all of those fragments. And what I know from my experience when I covered suicide bombings in Israel, Israel had a very, very quick system to match all the DNA of anybody who was killed in a suicide bomb blast so that they could be given a proper Jewish burial within 24 hours. So the fact that the Air Force says that there wasn't a technique to match those fragments just is not true from my experience. Jenna.
This is really interesting context. A very upsetting story. We'll continue to keep our viewers up to date on.
Yes, indeed, we'll have to keep on top of stories like that. Even if the Air Force, to some degree, couldn't identify remains, find a place and a time after a war where we don't have a tomb of an unknown soldier. They get a decent, proper burial. But when you work for Satan himself, they throw you in a garbage dump. They couldn't find some arable land in the United States of America to put unidentified remains with some sort of monument, some place where the family could go to say their prayers and honor their loved ones. Find that very hard to believe. Mafioso, killers, degenerates, those are the people that dispose of bodies in garbage dumps and burn them in a pet mortuary so that they can be never discovered or identified again because it's a secret of the state. And this is a state that you're going to trust soon with the NDAA, where the concept of what was in Central and South America called the missing will return to the vernacular again. They'll just be missing. No one will ever know what happened because they've already set up a trail where they can commit these atrocities and dispose of the bodies of their own people. It was absolutely scandalous. So part of what Alex Jones was carrying, detention camp order follows preparations for civil unrest. KBR seeks subcontractor status to outfit emergency environment centers. Kellogg Brown and Root are looking to activate camps built for FEMA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers across the United States. The Senate's passage of Section 1031 of the National Defense Authorization Act allows American citizens to be snatched off the street and held in detention camps without trial. In 2006, KBR was contracted to build these detention centers. Of course, that was just a big conspiracy. Major police forces are going into training sessions on how to handle some of these things. American troops returning from the Middle East in 2008 were specially trained for civil unrest and crowd control. That involved upwards of 20,000 troops. The U.S. Army War College Strategic Institute warned the United States may experience massive civil unrest as a result of strategic shock. The report was authored by retired Lieutenant Colonel Nathan Freire. The military may be needed to quell purposeful domestic resistance. Not necessarily protest. Resistance. Resistance to what? The globalists are meeting in Europe to discuss, their latest bailout provisions. Of course, they released their statement before they even had the meeting because everything was arranged in advance. So in July, they're going to have a 500 billion euro kitty to look after things. I thought the ship was sinking now. Why are we waiting till July to do anything? Because they're just lying and lying and lying and lying to try to keep the hopes up that it doesn't implode too soon. They have a very strict timetable, as we heard from Pastor Lindsay on the Alex Jones show today. We'll even get much deeper into the timetable because a lot of his stuff is, yes, it's going to happen, but the fine details to a degree are left out. And we broke the Google code, and the code this morning was just absolutely phenomenal. It's the whole story pretty much from beginning to end, and how soon the end could be based on the dates they supplied. Don't make plans for Christmas. The National Emergency Centers Act or H.R. 645 was first introduced into Congress in January 2009 and is still awaiting passage. So I guess maybe that will be one of the final nails in the coffin to be assembled. Alex Jones has put up the documents for the contract that KBR is getting to establish these FEMA camps. I guess we don't really have to get into that in a great deal. Some of the details that come out about the Senate approving the military custody vote, which happened on Tuesday last, 61 to 37. So it's like 61 of your senators are traitors. A couple didn't show up or whatever. The legislation has several steps to go, but we can see very clearly where it is going to go. require the government to place into military custody any suspected Al-Qaeda or one of its allies. Arrest extends to the United States soil. The executive branch could issue a waiver and keep a prisoner in the civilian system. Hardly likely. Will raise serious and unsettled legal questions and would be inconsistent with fundamental American principle that our military forces do not or do patrol the streets. Habeas corpus would go out the window. That's like a trial to show cause about why you were arrested. The posse comitatus goes out the window. Even the police won't have control over the military. They got more guns, so I guess they'll be the lead band here. And then, when you look at some of the people who are against this, it just adds more salt to the wounds in a way. Secretary of Defense Leon E. Panetta, the Director of National Intelligence James R. Clapper, the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation Robert S. Mueller III have voiced opposition to this proposal. Maybe they read the Constitution once or twice. Only 2 Republicans voted against it, Mark Kirk of Illinois, Rand Paul of Kentucky. The Democrats were split, so that at least brought up some opposition to this. But all the rest of the Republicans were hardcore, hoping to turn America upside down. They use as a basis a 2004 Supreme Court decision. We brought that up on a previous show and showed you a news video from Fox News about that. So we're seeing a slow rope being put around the neck of the Americans and now the Siamese twin Canadians with absolutely no input or understanding by the broad masses of people. But that's the way you want to have it. I know I'm watching one of those old, Winds of War series or something with Robert Mitchum. And they go into graphic detail about what happens into the concentration camps. The big thing that you have to have is you have to have people totally and completely unaware. It has to be a surprise to the last minute to be effective for you. If people wake up anywhere along the line, well, then you're going to encounter resistance. Of course you would resist. They're going to kill you. They have no need for you. If the economy collapses, they don't have what it takes to feed you and look after you anymore. You become like excess animals on a farm. And what do farmers do with excess animals? They kill them en masse. Even though they can't retrieve anything much from them, they're just too expensive to maintain. They're not going to maintain you. They're going to eliminate you. And the whole process depends on your being ignorant of the fact. One of our supporters and listeners, has informed us that through contacts with military personnel, that they've done training exercises like this in Canada, and we have our own facilities in Saskatchewan, and we've reported on the ones in Ontario before and the procedures on how this works. And I will reconnoiter around Toronto about where it's going to be happening again, because I see new facilities that have been built in preparation for something that weren't there a short time ago. Nice, handily, close to the rail lines where previous training was done. One of my friends in the military police briefed me on that very, very clearly and succinctly. Then we get into one of Saoirse Fall's articles, which I don't particularly like to use because a lot of it's propaganda, but maybe the hint in there, Obama issues kill order for Ron Paul as Russia prepares for war. There is other material backing this up. Some of it we'll get into shortly when we start talking about Mr. McCain and how they're using the Arab Spring concept in Russia to try to destabilize the Russian government and overturn it. Russia has sent their carrier task force with the Admiral Kuznetsov off Syria. It's there to play ball with the USS George Bush. Their latest anti-ship missiles have been sent to Syria. They're prepared to pull the pin very, very quickly if necessary. People are starting to find out that money is just disappearing hand over foot. as the guest on the Alex Jones Show said today, we can expect an end to fiat currencies. In 2012, they would just cease to exist. Anything you have in paper will cease to exist. If you haven't prepared a lifeboat, if you're not prepared, you will cease to exist. We'll get into that too with one of the executives from the UBS Bank in Switzerland saying the same thing. It's just shocking. He says you need 3 metals. 3. Precious metals, because paper money will be worthless. Tin to hold your food in cans, and the metals that are used to make small caliber weapons, because there isn't going to be anything else. And that's from an executive with one of the major Swiss banks. But of course, you're not going to see that or hear that in mainstream media. There's a reason for that. You have no need to know. You may not even be here to see it, because there's lots of garbage dumps, and we know how to shred the bodies. This was a movie, some people like it, some people don't, called Conspiracy. This deals with the establishment of laws that are done in secret to carry out programs like that. We have to understand that not everyone is perfect. They're going to do a perfect job in a perfect world for everything. They just do the best they can with what they have and what knowledge they have. But this film is posted on the website. You can watch it. This is the same parallel that McCain and Senator Levin did, met in secret. They had another WANSI conference. They established a law to destroy the United States of America, to shred the Constitution, and establish a law whereby the government can execute anyone, anywhere, anytime, and hold them in custody forever. Anybody home? It's like I always joke before, you can wake up before you get on the train, you can wake up on the train, you can wake up before you get into the gate of the camp, you can wait and wake up until you've showered or changed your clothes, get ready for the shower. But once they close the shower room door, you can't wake up anymore. It's over, sweetheart. And you have to make a decision. Are you going to tolerate and stand for this kind of shit, or are you going to stand up like men and women and just say no? So this is part of a maybe broad-based, all the isms have got together. Globalism is the new mantra. They may involve the forces of fascism, communism, and capitalism all together in one giant global force. A lot of our politicians, as we brought up before, have accounts with the Vatican Bank. All the politicians seem to have to go and kiss the ring of the Vatican, whether they're Catholic or not. In that short little flash of an image, we see Prime Minister Harper not kissing the ring, but making sure he pays homage to the Pope. And as we said, he calls himself Vicar of Christ. In Latin, vicis means anti, anti-Christ. Christ said, Peter, the rock that they built the church on, he called him Satan. It can't get any plainer. In this change, you didn't see this probably on all the big mainstream papers, but that's our Foreign Affairs Minister, John Baird. I knew him when he was an Ontario legislator. Didn't realize he was that despicable. And that's him with the Papal Nuncio, the ambassador to the Vatican in Canada, Archbishop Pedro Lopez Quintana. We have to be very, very concerned because in history, this was the Papal Nuncio in World War II. And there's pretty much no mistake. These fine German soldiers standing guarding him on the side. These popes usually have the title called Grand Inquisitor before on their CV. That hasn't changed any. These two books got to be right on the short list, The Secret History of the Jesuits and Vatican Assassins, to get into some of the fine details of how insidious and powerful they can be if they want to. You only have one choice. As Martin Luther did, he nailed his message to the door, we nail our message to the door too here in cyberspace and try to tell you what's going on to the best of our ability. So the next one, of course, I guess, for them is to have a false flag war. They failed. We did break some codes before about getting the war started with Iran, figuring out the blue arrow code and what the red portion meant. And we blew the model airplane attack, which would just be a false flag operation, where real missiles would have done the dirty work and blamed on some stupid fool who had some big model airplanes with a light amount of explosives inside. That all fell apart. We're lucky about that. We bought some time. We showed you that there's probably a war going on in Iran because facilities were blown up. We showed you the pictures last week. And those are things we have to be very, very concerned about, because once they start this sort of thing, there's pretty much no stopping it. And it won't be pretty. We have to look into the background of the man who was behind this bill, the senator from Manchuria, John McCain. John McCain was a prisoner of war in Vietnam for some period of time. He was captured on October the 26th, 1967. He wasn't released until March 15th, 1973. He caved to get medical treatment for his injuries. Apparently he had a broken leg, 2 broken arms when he bailed out of his fighter plane, a Douglas A-4 Skyhawk. His father was basically the commander-in-chief of Pacific Forces, Admiral McCain. And when the Vietnamese found that out, instead of letting him die like the other pilots, he got special treatment. He got basically like 2 hospice workers, a Soviet surgeon to come in and tend to his wounds. It took him 22 months of rehabilitation. He was put in the infamous plantation, the infamous room number 11, and then ultimately in the Hao Lo prison in Hanoi, the Hanoi Hilton. They even put up a statue, this is hard to believe, of John McCain. And John McCain went back to see his statue in Hanoi, near the place where they pulled him out of the drink. Now you got to remember, they were at war and he's dropping bombs on people to kill them. Why would you put up a statue for your enemy? It just really doesn't make sense too much. Not too many statues of German pilots in London, and there's not too many statues, if any, of British pilots or American pilots in Berlin, even though we're friends now. This is supposed to be his flight suit, and it's a fraud. The CIA document link that's attached to this says that he was bleeding heavily from the leg where he broke his leg. They did a good job in the Vietnamese laundry, let me tell you. When the plane was hit with a missile at 4,500 feet, well, you would imagine there'd be an explosion and fire and all kinds of black stuff and burns and whatever all over his flight suit. It's not there. It looks like it just came off the rack, because it probably did. So maybe they made a lot of it up. We can't deny that. It just looks very, very strange that this flight suit would be in such great condition. The other thing is pilots bailing out have a dye pack. His dye pack blew up, and he was leaking blue dye all over the place. His flight suit's nice and green. He was supposed to have been bayoneted in the foot by the people who rescued him. The boots are there, and I guess you can't look really close enough, but they don't really look like they have blue dye on them, and I don't think they look like they've been bayoneted. He was also rifle butted in the shoulder. But I think a lot of people are familiar with the Manchurian Candidate concept and how they must have worked on him big time, knowing that sooner or later he's going to be coming home and getting into a responsible position, and he could very well be under the control of a hostile communist power, even still today. Because there is a word in almost every language, if not every language, called revenge. What could Vietnam do to get revenge? They could get their Manchurian Candidate, who in this picture is being visited by a Spanish psychiatrist, Fernando Barrel, to start a war where a third party comes in and blows the living shit out of the United States. And you sit back as a master strategist and admire the damage that you've caused with your insidious human weapon. Something a lot of veterans can't understand is how when John McCain came back, he meets this North Vietnamese colonel and embraces him in a big hug. You know, I don't know if he pulled his teeth out or, you know, this is the guy who bayoneted him in the foot or what the story is. Big hugs, big kisses. So any veteran who came back from a situation like that, whether it be in World War II, Korea, other guys from Vietnam, they said, you could barely even stand to look at an image of the face of your tormentor, never mind embrace him in a big bear hug, huddly cuddly smile, smile. Because your overwhelming desire would be now to strangle the mother because he tortured you for years and starved you and beat you. Huggy kissy? I don't think so. So what are we left with if we do have the Manchurian? This is our senator pointing the pistol at us, taking us apart, limb by limb, destroying the greatest nations on the planet Earth, ripping the Constitution to shreds, giving back to America what Vietnam suffered for many, many long years because they were able to take over the mind of a man who did run for president and who may very well end up in that position, but even in his position as senator today, he's a very dangerous man. In this article, U.S. attempts to overthrow the Russian government. We find that Mr. McCain is chairman of the International Republican Institute, a central figure in the current Western engineered campaign against the Arab world, even credited by the New York Times as helping nurture the Arab uprisings by funding and training activists across the Arab world. So basically setting the stage with a war with Iran and a good part of the Middle East. He visited and stood in front of the flag of the Benghazi terror brigades. He, the U.S. government and NATO fund, trained, armed, and provided air support as they committed wholesale genocide across the nation of Libya. And then here at the same token, he's writing a law to get tough on terrorists, but he's funding the quote-unquote Benghazi terror brigades. So he openly admits, in speaking with this organization, the IRI, I would like to be a little less cocky in the Kremlin with my KGB cronies today if I were Vladimir Putin. I would be little less secure in the seaside resort of President Hu and the few men who govern and decide the fate of 1.3 billion people. Lay the groundwork for Russia's next generation of democratic leadership. You're not even a Russian. Who are you laying generations of leadership for? Created a new network of politicians, NGO activists, and elected officials who are interested in the democratic development of municipal governance. So they're like training everyone through these organizations to be our fearless leaders, to Manchurianize everyone. Even the Prime Minister of Australia said she went on the CIA red pill tour while she was an up-and-coming potential leader in a party and with a philosophy that was completely diametrically opposed to President Bush and his war. Now, she's pro-war. She's also a hardcore socialist, if not Marxist-Leninist communist. Good company to keep, it appears. So this IRI, and then based on these NGOs and another organization called Golos, are seeking to expose voting irregularities in Russia, cast doubts on the validity of the elections, and justify street mobs brought out by the Russian opposition groups to trigger an Arab Spring in Russia. Vladimir Putin isn't stupid. He understands these things. He has nuclear weapons. He's squaring off with these people in the Middle East. You're peeing in his cornflakes. He doesn't have to take it. And if your gamble doesn't pay off, you could be eating radioactive dust for the next 25 to 35,000 years. That's some poker game. And in a way, it's your own fault because your Constitution clearly says, if you're an American, we the people. So what part of it don't you understand? People. You're in charge. You have to pick up the burdens and bear the loads to understand what's going on and to take effective action, because if you don't, you will surely die a horrible death, maybe at the hands of your own people. So this was the big Google code today. Happy birthday, Diego Rivera. I'm sure everybody's seen it that has internet somewhere. The thing that I found surprising with this image was the fact that it was today, December the 8th. I was expecting to see something on December the 7th because that was the day of infamy. But no, the soldiers who were sailors, airmen, that were killed on December the 7th in Pearl Harbor were just ignored. And then the 125th anniversary of a hardcore dedicated comrade, communist Diego Rivera, is extolled. Of course, Diego Rivera is a great mural painter, an artist, and it's through looking at these images that we see what's going to happen in the near future. So in that image, of course, you see a man painting the rising sun. The rising sun was the image of Imperial Japan as well. You saw towers off to the right. There's a small plane heading to one of those towers. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Underneath the scaffolding, you see a hidden figure, a man. We brought up on this forum the artists who were working on the World Trade Center, gelatin, with the Plan B thing. That's still on our website. The blogs are there with the images that these people took out windows of the World Trade Center and put structures outside, totally contradictory to any known repair or construction practice, and they got away with it. They drew drawings and images of the tower in destruction a month before it happened, if not a year before the date that it happened, and got away with it. We name names, point these things out. In this image too, there's a woman with a child and they're sleeping, just like the rest of the world. That's one of the big things. Everybody's sleeping. No one's paying attention to the signs. So the other big factor about this artist is his exhibit is opening up in New York City. It's there right now, the Museum of Modern Art. 80 years. He's back. And that's where we have to wonder about the date of the original exposition in the United States. It was December 22nd, 1931. Are they trying to tell us that December the 22nd is going to be an important day in infamy again? We must understand that they don't attack you when you're ready, right? They don't call you up and make an appointment to say, today, we're coming, get ready. They get you when you're sleeping. And what's one of the best times to attack the Western world is when it's getting into the festival solstice season. December 22nd is also the start of the solstice, culminating on the 25th. A good day for, as in that image, the sun. The sun returns. It ends its sleepy journey. So that's another reason why that image is so important. And then when you look at other images that Diego has done, this is one of the classics. It doesn't really need a whole lot of explanation here. We can see quite clearly that they're rounding people up. The army's there. There's fallen people on the ground. Is this some symbol? This is an actual picture in the gallery. Are they taking people to the FEMA camp? The title of the work is called The Uprising. And that's exactly what they're planning for. That's exactly what they're training for, is an uprising. So here we have the coded message in the few paintings that are highlighted by the media about this event. This first part of the exhibit went from December 22nd, of course, to January 27th, 1932. So is that another significant date? Is that when it ends, starts? Is that another day? We don't really know. We just know they're important. One of the other pictures that's come up is this little monster here called Indian Warrior. So we know the Mayan prophecies come due in 2012, and we see something that could very well be a stone carving image of a Mayan prophecy stabbing a conquistador with some sharp object. It's not a blade like a knife. It looks more like a stone, if that has some symbolism. The conquistador, of course, could be representing capitalism, the Vatican, because generally they were Spanish Catholics in their missions. So maybe things aren't going to go all that well. And this other classic piece of work here is just like you just see the whole world before your eyes. It's called Frozen Assets. And of course that's what we can expect in a new year, is all our assets frozen because there won't be any money. So we see the big metropolis above, and then in the middle this is the FEMA camp. This is a homeless shelter with one solitary guard watching over all the bodies, but everybody seems to be kind of out for the count, so maybe it's not even a shelter for the homeless, maybe it's a mortuary. And then in the bottom is the banksters, with the bankster controlling the access to the vault, to the gate of the money. There's almost a bit of a parallel between the World Trade Centers and 9/11, because they had a big vault underneath with lots of gold that sort of disappeared, never to be seen again. And then one of the other pictures that goes with it takes very little to understand agrarian leader Zapata holding the pale horse in the book of Revelation. And I looked and beheld a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over a fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. That's probably in the National Defense Authorization Act. But we have hope, and this was the hope. They did this painting, Man at the Crossroads. That was to be put in the Rockefeller Center back then. But of course, in the middle is Vladimir Lenin, and that didn't go over too well. They say that Rockefeller ordered the painting destroyed, and Rivera wouldn't change it, alter it, or whatever, so it was destroyed. But it was destroyed by the workmen. The workmen came up and they smashed that thing to pieces. There was nothing left of it because they had the power. The power is in your hands, we the people. So Rivera had to go back to Mexico and do another one, and he did this one, Man, Controller of the Universe. And considering he drew this in the 1930s, when you look at this image, and you see all these crops at the bottom, and you start to wonder, is this like genetically modified food? You see the cosmos, and then this man who seems to be controlling the universe, and this hand coming out of something like a drain pipe, with some sort of complex mechanism where man controls the world. And then you remember, of course, Conspiracy Cafe. We brought in about the Singularity Project, the thing where they want to take human beings' minds and souls and plant them in an android being, because they believe that they are the ultimate creator of life. Not something to look forward to. But this is what they're working on, and this art has been around for a long time to show their wares. This painting I just picked, N.L. Arsenal, 1928. People say there's the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules, but I can assure you it's them who have the steel that make the rules. They're all unpacking Mauser rifles, getting ready for the communist revolution. And then, of course, this classic, the kid. There we see the Singularity Project, the android, perhaps, the devil, the pale horse, the victim of what's coming, walking down the street in what would generally be like a French Impressionist type of painting, but with hell itself, and little kid Rivero off to the side walking with these people. So keep those dates in mind. Remember, everybody drops their guard. No one's going to be looking for our politicians on December the 22nd. They could be all underground in their bunkers, safely recused to face Armageddon while we suffer on top, seeing what happens with our relocation camps. They've got more than 72 hours to give notice to open them up and get them operating, and I will do my recce downtown here in Toronto to see how ours are doing. And we also have a news article, North Korea may soon be able to strike the USA with an ultimate doomsday weapon. Of course, a nuclear device exploded in the atmosphere to create an electromagnetic pulse, fly all the microchips and make us helpless. Of course, we don't have to be made helpless because we understand those kinds of things. We are prepared. We know what electromagnetic pulse is. And hopefully by being prepared, we can survive. Because knowledge is power. They do everything in the world to prevent you from having ultimate knowledge, which means ultimate power. Even our leaders have very limited knowledge of what is really going on in the world. I got my blurb from my MP, and it just talks about, horse feathers, basically. Like, it's just completely useless. It's not even good for toilet paper because the paper's too hard. There's just pictures of this twit in various locations with absolutely no substance about what's coming around, why or how we're to deal with it or interpret it. Because we're slaves. We're not citizens of this country. We're just cattle and chattel. The United States Postal Service is facing bankruptcy, 100,000 layoffs, 250 postal stations closed. Oh, by the way, it just happens that fast. There's a court case going on for the gold of the former Chinese Republic, Tuan Matang. And in a way, this is an amazing case because the government is defunct, the bonds were never paid, and people are suing the people who profited and took the money from these bonds and holding them responsible for the loss of assets. A case well worth following because most governments will be running away with stuff completely. Downgrades are on the horizon. Standard & Poor's is just saying Europe is a basket case, and probably in a very short period of time the real reflection of what they're worth will be made. But I guess we're getting close to the end. How's our time doing? 5 minutes? Okay. So this was the UBS article, UBS advice on what to buy in case of Eurozone breakup, precious metals, tin goods, and small caliber weapons. Stefan Dio, Larry Hathaway. So what can we expect? It won't be a polite breakup in Europe if it comes apart because everybody will blame everybody else. So quote unquote, Mr. Hathaway says, I suppose there might be some assets worthy of consideration, precious metals for example. But other metals would make wise investments too, among them tin goods and small caliber weapons. Sadly, however, it can't be ruled out, just as it would have been improper to rule out the horrors of the first half of the 20th century before they happened. So they're not ruling anything out. So as the European Union comes apart at the seams, we just see one of the most basic, fundamental laws of economics being stepped on all over the place. And we've talked about it many, many times in this show because I took economics in university and threw up. It's called the economy of scale. Pretty much everything you need to know to save the global economy can be done with your first year economics textbook. When you exceed the economy of scale, you exceed the powers of things to remain stable and be held together, and they collapse and fall apart. These people are megalomaniacs. They have to have everything bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, with no regard to the fact they will become unstable and fall apart. One of the biggest problems we have, of course, is they're working on all these free trade deals, and they're taking apart the bulkheads on the Titanic so that water can get around the ship faster. The water being money, goods, services, to get around the world faster and easier, they claim. There's only one problem. When there's a hole at one end of the ship, the water gets into every section of the ship if there are no interceding bulkheads. And it's like that with the global economy. Can Greece bring down all of Europe? Yes, it can, because they eliminated the bulkheads. We can't do the appropriate amount of damage control. But what we do see are small little shining stars or examples, and one of them is Iceland. And Iceland just basically says to the bankers, take a hike. The citizen, the bottom end, us, we're not going to pay for your mistakes. We're not going to pay for your greed. We're not going to pay for your lawlessness. Because ultimately that's what our leaders do, is they put us, the taxpayer, on the hook for all these mistakes and problems. And we have to pay. That may be the deal. Take the chip, and you'll be absolved of your debt. Especially if you didn't prepare. Some of the scientific gizmos they're working on, a new supercomputer that can predict the future. I wouldn't bet too much on that one, because there's a very simple process, and again, it always goes back to the most simple thing sometimes, and it doesn't matter how good your computer is or how good your models appear to you, garbage in, garbage out. China's nuclear arsenal could be 40 times bigger than originally estimated, according to a Georgetown University study. They've dug 3,000 miles of underground tunnels for the 2nd Artillery Corps. The 2000 earthquake in Sichuan revealed the existence of these collapsed tunnels. We were doing a show in 2008. We said that 3 years ago. We don't get paid by the Pentagon or the CIA. We just call them the way we see them. And when that stuff collapsed, we saw them. And we speculated too that those tunnels and that area, very highly militarized part of China, was the center and flux of their defense mechanisms. It appears we were right. Bang on right. We also speculated that an earthquake weapon was used to cause the collapse, because you can fight a war, but if I can't prove that I started the war, if I could send some sort of force that can't be seen and hit my producer on the nose, he has no idea that I hit him on the nose. He just wonders why he recoiled back and felt some pain. That's the way we fight wars in the modern era. We can use weapons that you might have thought could only exist in a science fiction film. U.S. weapons, on the other hand, are riddled with Chinese parts that are substandard and won't perform very well. That's got to give us a great deal of confidence with Senator McCain kicking Vladimir Putin in the shins and orchestrating the stare down off the coast of Syria. And then a little small anecdote, but a lot of people believe the Ark of the Covenant is in an Ethiopian chapel, and that it contains the original 10 Commandments. Well, the roof is leaking on St. Mary's of Zion Church. Only one person is allowed to see the Ark of the Covenant. They have to build another structure to transfer it into while they conduct repairs. Orthodox Christians in Ethiopia have claimed that they've had this for centuries and are looking after it. People are speculating that while they move it or replace it to this other structure, that others, other than the assigned individual, may get a glimpse of this thing. It would be better if it speaks to us and offers us some solutions to some of our problems coming on us very, very quickly. The European Union Court has confirmed that France cannot ban genetically modified crops. They say they haven't done proper studies on such. And I just look at that as a total load of BS. I think the judges are probably paid off in a situation like that, because we ban narcotics, and I don't think we do great feasibility studies on the benefits or lack of benefits of these things. We just ban them. But establishing this in law, I'd like to see the drug dealers take the governments to the courts and say, well, you've done no studies on cocaine or heroin or anything else, so we should be able to sell it. But as we showed in one of our shows, a Russian scientist who was studying genetically modified crops found that her test animals, rats, became infertile after the 3rd generation, and that's the whole basis of having these things. And we also get a hidden application in our cell phones where they're recording all your text messages and keystrokes. The app is called HTC IQ Agent. We have a short video on the website about that, conspiracy-cafe.com, where you can watch. They see you everywhere you go with everything you do. Sirhan is claiming that he was a Manchurian. Surprise, surprise, that he really didn't shoot RFK. There were 13 shots fired. Way more than his gun could hold. So he's looking to, hopefully, I guess, get a new trial, but at least to get some consideration in release if necessary. And I guess we're heading to the hills there. We got our 5 minutes?
You're good.
Okay. So it appears we're at the end of our rope. We've got another show next week. Same that time, same that channel. Things are moving very, very quickly. How fast they move could be very well interpreted at any moment. We'll post things on the website if they come up and we understand them. Some of the other forums in alternative media are carrying the sword and telling it like it is. That's all we can tell you is, whatever happens, say your prayers, Rabbit, because that's one of the most important things. They're going to be looking after you in the short run and the long run. Look after your neighbors, be prepared, and remember, they always come for you when you have your back turned, especially solstice time. There's always something happening just into the new year. Boxing Day is a very common one. So that's why I hate to see that we're shut down over that period, but my good friend Timothy Spearman may have something going on his show on the Orion Network, and if something pops up, I think we'll put links up and do some special broadcasts. So anyway, we're here. We don't cut and run. We'll be with you now, with you at the end. This is Conspiracy Cafe. This is that channel. This is downtown Toronto. This is where it's at. And we thank you for coming out. Good night.
Still I breathe free. 3 times I shot the sheriff and did not spare the deputy. 2 prayers I'm praying until we're together. 1 promise I'm keeping tonight and forever.